See a few people are still signing in. I feel like a sportscaster. Okay, well, my computer says it's 6 o'clock, so I think we should get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I'm Deborah Horde. I'm president of PhotoSynthesis Productions, a little documentary film company downtown Ithaca for the past 35 years, which is starting to sound like a long time. I'm going to MC a bit this evening. So we're going to start with some brief introductions so you can see who all is here tonight. Then I'm going to introduce a film clip that we made just for this event, which is going to be a lot of fun to share. So I guess I should say that I'm the producer and co-director of the feature film Move When the Spirit Says Move, Life and Legacy of Dorothy Cotton. And I also am the producer and co-director of There's Your Ready Girl, which is a short clip we put together during the pandemic because we felt we had something we could do, and we took inspiration from Dorothy, who would get moving. And so we made this little short clip about to help generate interest in voting in the last presidential election. And maybe we can take partial credit for the way things turned out. So that's me. Laura, alphabetically, I believe you would be next.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. I really want to shout out to the History Center for offering to host this event for us. It's a real treat to be able to have something that I think you're going to really enjoy, and that also focuses our attention on what we can say in a short amount of time about a fabulous person and her many colleagues. So it's exciting. I'm Laura Branca. I'm Senior Fellow and Interim Project Director of the Dorothy Cotton Institute, and I've been involved with the Institute since it was just an idea and turned into something remarkable in conversations in Dorothy's living room back in 2008. So it's a real treat to be at this point in the development of the Institute. I'm going to pass it to Margot.
Hi, I will echo much of what Laura said. My appreciation to the History Center for sponsoring this. It's been a real delight, and a real delight to partner with Deborah and PSP Productions in bringing this to light, to the various stories. Like Laura, I am a senior fellow with the Dorothy Cotton Institute and was part of founding the Institute when it was birthed as a series of free-floating conversations in Dorothy's living room and eventually coalesced into what we have today. And I'm really delighted to be here with all of you.
Thank you. It has been wonderful to be working with the History Center and then for the two of us to be able to continue our work together, which is it's rewarding, but it also, I really feel like we're doing something good here. This is going to be exciting. So we I put together this film clip that includes a number of different things that I think you'll be interested in. We're going to start out with a little few remarks from the New York Women in Film and TV representative. They're the group gave us our Best Documentary Award for in their online shorts festival this year, which is always exciting. And we're going to then follow by the 11-minute Ready Girl piece, which maybe some of you have already seen, but it's still is very emotional for me to watch it. Then there's about 10 or 12 minutes of remarks that were previously recorded for a panel conversation at Stanford University's Film Festival by the Martin Luther King Institute for Education and Research. And so those Dorothy's former colleagues, Andrew Young and Clay Carson, joined in on the panel and had some fun things to say about the film and about Dorothy. And I also, the clip includes some particular remarks from Laura and Margot that were just had to be included because they really added a lot to the conversation. And then the clip ends with an excerpt of a performance from the Dorothy Cotton Jubilee Singers, who are a wonderful local organization I'm sure many of you know. So now, Laura, yes, let's Laura.
Yeah, I just don't want to really get started with the program without just a little acknowledgement that at least where we are, you may be zooming in from all over the country, I don't know, but where we are, we want to acknowledge that we work and live on the traditional ancestral lands of the Cayuga people. And we give thanks for the opportunity to be in this incredibly beautiful place. And they are alive people who are still among us. And so we really want to pay a little bit of homage to where we are and remember that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Okay, well, I am going to now make an attempt to share my screen, and so you can see the video, and we'll be back. All three of us will be back for a Q&A in about 24 minutes.
Hi, my name is Katie Chambers, and I'm the Community Engagement Director at New York Women in Film and Television, or NYWIFT for short. NYWIFT is a nonprofit professional association that advocates for equality in the film, television, and media industry and supports women at every stage of their careers through professional development programs, networking opportunities, signature events, funding, and so much more. On behalf of NYWIFT, I want to offer heartfelt congratulations to Deborah Horde and the entire team behind There's Your Ready Girl for their outstanding achievement. We were so proud to include the film as part of our 2021 NYWIFT Online Shorts Festival, which was presented in partnership with iWoman TV and Go Indie TV. And at that festival, it was named Best Documentary. In just 11 short minutes, the film shines a light on so many issues that impact our society today. The importance of education in creating access and opportunity, and the stark inequities that are faced by people of color after so many years. The importance of women leaders, especially women of color as leaders across politics and media, lifting up the voices of young people and teaching them to claim their worth. These tenets not only speak to Dorothy Foreman Cotton's legacy, but are also key to the work we do here at New York Women in Film and Television, which is why I'm so glad that we were able to include the film in this year's festival. Congratulations again to Deborah and the team. We at NYWIFT are so proud of all of you and all you have accomplished, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
You might be interested in the earliest flicker of consciousness about the great wrong that I realized was being perpetrated against Black people. I was about 10 years old, and a boy about my age was riding his bicycle down our dusty little street there in Goldsboro, North Carolina, the town where I was born. You could tell where Black folk lived because the pavement stopped when it got through the white neighborhood, and the Black folk lived where the streets were dusty. As this boy was riding his bicycle and kicking up the dust down our street, he was singing a tune. What is it, deep in the heart of, is it Texas? He was singing, deep in the heart of Nigger Town. I've never forgotten that. How upset I felt, how angry I felt, how helpless to do anything about it. I've never forgotten that little boy.
I knew one thing about Dorothy. When the children came home, when all four of them came home, she would sit them in chairs in this little house and she would be the teacher. And every day that they would do this, she would get up and teach them something. You know, she was a teacher.
There was a teacher who took a very special interest in me. One day I said a poem in her class. I don't remember what the poem was, but I do remember that as I headed back to my seat, she said very audibly, "There's your ready girl." It rings in my ear to this day when Miss Rosa Gray said to the class, "There's your ready girl." That phrase, that description just goes around and around in my consciousness. There's your ready girl. But I knew that, I think I'm gonna cry. I knew that I never wanted to disappoint her.
There would have been no President Barack Obama without the citizenship schools of Dorothy. Let's be clear. Every black member of the United States Congress owes their part of their being there to the studying and the teaching of those citizenship schools that laid the foundation for black political power and fusion political power between black folk and white folk and brown folk that have worked to change this country to where it is today. And while we may not be where we ought to be, we would not be where we are if it was not for the sacrifice of those like Dorothy Cotton.
The citizenship education program was about helping people discover their power. We had to help people understand what made a citizen. What was citizenship all about? What did it mean? Every aspect of our system, the political system, every institution helped to reinforce the notion that black folk were less than other people in the culture. One had to know cursive writing in order to register. I think it was just a trick to exclude black folk. But we knew that we could do more with this training program than just help people learn to read and write.
You don't know what you don't know until someone teaches you, until you learn, until you get invited into another chapter of the story, so to speak. I didn't know about citizenship education or the Citizenship Education Project. It wasn't until later that I really understood the fact that people traveled from all over the region, all over the South and the border states to really become equipped for the movement and for the struggle.
Fannie Lou Hamer lived on Mr. Marlowe's plantation in Ruleville, Mississippi, and she was trying to get black folk to understand why they ought to register to vote. She was threatened that she would be killed, her family would be killed, if she didn't stop that foolishness of telling black folk that they ought to have some political power. I mentioned her because she was one of our star pupils who finished the 8th grade, but she was up at the Democratic Convention saying, "Is this America?"
There are these crucial women. They wanted to project other people forward. Maybe it's called nurturing. What are the aspects of being a parent, especially a mother?
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine.
I feel completely privileged to have had exposure all those years to Dr. Dorothy Cotton. She told us, I didn't work for Dr. King. I worked with Dr. King.
Let it shine. Let it shine.
I remember the first time she said that, and I remember sort of shifting my posture. Like, okay, clear, got it.
This little light of mine.
I'm a native of Selma, Alabama, and so Dorothy Cotton is an icon, is a hero for me. We see the faces, particularly in the Civil Rights Movement, we see the faces of Dr. King and Abernathy, but if you really are a student of that movement and if you really talk to folks that can tell you who was really doing the work, there were women that were doing the work, and oftentimes they're marginalized in our own story.
I'll never forget everything with Katrina. You know, glued to the television like many people. And this little Black girl, she got on the camera, she said, "We need help. When is somebody coming to help?" And then she just started adding this rhythm to it. And it was like, clearly this is a circumstance of outrageous pain. And in it, this 4 or 5-year-old little Black girl, she knows her worth. And she's got all these messages challenging her worth, even in this moment, challenging her humanity. But that desire to claim one's worth is not necessarily an easy thing to do.
It is 11:45 in Georgia, and guess what? We're still at a polling site. And guess where the polling site is? It's a nursing home, because that made a lot of sense to have voting at a nursing home in the middle of a pandemic.
People are recognizing the fragility of democracy. I can't tell you how many people I've heard, and white people in particular, white voters say, "He can't do that." Well, yes, he can. And so I think why people are lifting Black women right now, because I think that there is a particular kind of perspective, being that Black women sit at that intersection of sexism and racism. And it doesn't necessarily throw us off our game. We've been creative and innovative to know how to navigate and work through it.
What Dorothy did then is so needed now. I have the sneaking suspicion that if Dorothy was alive, she would say, "Stop fussing and fighting so much about Trump and organize and vote and deal with it."
Dorothy Cotton, she mapped out a blueprint, right? So what are we going to do with the methodologies that she left?
It seems to me that one thing we need to be very intentional about as we teach in this time, in these days, that things can change. It doesn't mean it's easy, but things can change.
If there was ever a time for the leadership, vision, and work of Black women in terms of not just protecting democracy, but really shaping the future of democracy, I think it would be now.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine.
You talk about women, Black women in leadership positions, and it already immediately you speak of that, and I already feel listened to. I already feel cared for.
Shine, let it shine.
And nurtured at a completely different level.
Think of yourself as someone who can change a situation.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
I think that her legacy, if you to try to simplify it, it was getting people aware of the rights that they should have. And, it seems very simple, that educational process, there you have the Bill of Rights in the United States, but breaking it down and convincing people that those rights should be theirs is an enormously difficult task if they've been denied those rights all their lives, or they feel themselves powerless. They might think I should have those rights, but it's just not, I just don't have the power to do it. But she understood that understanding that you deserve that gives you the power, because then you can begin to organize, you can begin to make it difficult on those in power.
The touchstone for our work with the Dorothy Cotton Institute was the citizenship education program. That was the name of the program that Dorothy led with Andrew Young and Septima Clark, and then later with other people who were participants in the program and became citizenship school educators themselves, and did the work all through the South, through all the southern states. And over the space of about, I'm guessing, 10 years, from maybe 1960 to 1970, they trained probably personally 25,000 people.
Dorothy Cotton, Septima Clark, and myself were the education wing of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What we were doing was what Mrs. Clark had been doing with the longshoremen off, she would catch the ferry with them in the morning and teach them to read and write, to register to vote, because the ferry ride was a little over an hour. And so she'd have a class in the morning and a class in the evening to get people registered to vote. Our effort was to try to take that from South Carolina across the South.
She referred to it as the best kept secret of the civil rights movement. And it was partly the best kept secret because they were trying to fly under the radar. And it was partly the best kept secret, to be blunt, I think, because it was work that women did. It was developmental work. It was educational work. It wasn't the flash of marching in the streets and mobilizing people, which was important. But as Dorothy, one of her most frequent phrases when she spoke, whether it was in her living room or publicly, was, "We didn't just march." And she wanted people to understand that there was this work of civic education, of citizenship education, of grassroots self-empowerment and leadership development that was essential to any movement building effort that often isn't seen, it isn't visible, it isn't talked about, and it makes it hard to understand how to carry on that tradition.
Education is a major part of any movement. That's why the Highlander Folk School and the Citizenship Education Program and the Freedom Schools in Mississippi, that's why they're so important, is that they understand that education is liberation, that you can't separate the two and you can't do one without the other, that you have to have people who can imagine a better future before they can get there. That's why King asked the question, where do we go from here?
I always felt that Dr. King, had to talk to the white world. I mean, he had to talk to the New York Times and Time magazine. But what we had to do was translate his message to people who were just learning to read and who'd never seen a New York Times.
Fortunately, she had someone, Andy Young, who could give her the freedom to do basically what she wanted to do. She didn't work for Andy Young, she worked with him. And as he has often pointed out, and she definitely pointed out, and that was, working with Septima was allowed her to, develop that feminist side of her. This was something that women could do. It was part of that tradition of females as teachers, and you didn't really need the men.
The work in every church, the women do most of the work. I don't care what the work is. The women are doing the work. in the civil rights movement, especially in the student movement, the guys would drive the cars and they'd make the women walk from door to door, knocking on doors, which was a far more dangerous work, but it was far less threatening for the people they were calling on, for a woman to be knocking on the door than a man. But the women used to complain about they stay up all night typing up the press conference, press releases, and then they never let a woman read them.
Yeah, when you see her actually teaching and leading a class, and she's a leader. And these were people her own age and sometimes older, but she could lead them because they knew that she had knowledge, and the lessons might have been simple, but trying to emphasize the importance of understanding your rights, understanding that that's what it's all about, is and that you can bring about change.
Because Dorothy was the strong, independent woman that she was, she would tell anybody off. I mean, she was totally fearless, and I mean, if there was some things that I wanted to say to Martin or Ralph or Wyatt, and if I'd said it, it would have been an ego battle, and I'd mention it to Dorothy, and she'd deal with it.
One of Dorothy's favorite questions was, why not you? Right? Here we are in Jim Crow South, where it was dangerous for people to even walk into the county clerk's office to register to vote. And Dorothy's question to people was, well, why aren't you the county clerk?
Again, when you think about the gulf between where we are as a society in the United States, between the rights that many people lack and the ideal of human rights, it's a big gulf even today. So I think her teaching has a great deal of relevance in today's world.
Don't wait for someone else to figure out how to bring us out of oppression and bondage and danger. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. And it is up to us, if we want to see change, to be that change. And this is the essential message that moved people from a mentality of victimhood to one of agency and full citizenship, full participation. This is government of the people, by the people, for the people, and we will equip ourselves with that knowledge and then go forth and, if necessary, demand redress of grievances and exercise our right to vote, run for office, be the leaders.
The only thing I didn't say about Dorothy is the importance of her singing. And she loved to sing. She had a beautiful voice, and she didn't sing alone, but whenever in any kind of tension, she could find the right song to start up, and everybody start singing, and the tensions would ease significantly.
And I say I'm gonna sing out. I'm gonna march on. Everybody sing. I'm gonna sing out. I'm gonna march on, march on.
was never something I thought I would have to do. But I'm march if I must. I've got a mission, you see, and I'll be damned if my children have to march for me. Now I believe in the power of raising my voice. I believe in the power of making some noise. Now if I die, I can't sing, and if I can't sing, I'll die. So we should sing for one another, give it a try. And I say, I'm gonna
Welcome back, everyone. I'm not sure we're all, there's, okay, there we are, some of us. That was fun for me to see again. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And there's Laura, okay. So I got sort of transfixed watching, and I don't know if we have any questions queued up. Is there, can we see the Q&A? No open questions. Okay. Okay, well, I can start us off because I remember, oh, did you want to say something, Margot? Oh, okay. That how did we get started on all of this? And each of us has a slide. I'd be interested. I remember each of you saying you'd sort of always wanted to do this, and so somehow now we are. One of you want to give your point of view on that?
I think from the very beginning, can you hear me? I think from the very beginning, we were talking about a documentary about Dorothy. And I'm going to say that when someone as remarkable as Dorothy is beginning to age, we begin to have the feeling like there's some amazing information here that should be shared that people don't know, and we need to move quickly. And so we spent a fair amount of time sort of looking at documentarians, filmmakers who had done interesting things. We met with some of them and we shopped around a little bit. We didn't have money, but we were thinking, well, if we find somebody good, we'll at least begin to conceptualize what this could be. And actually, I think, Margot, you had someone from Cooperative Extension, someone that was a colleague who came and brought a video camera to Dorothy's living room. And we spent 5 days trying to get Dorothy to tell us what was in the citizenship education program. And she was amazing. She told us fantastic stories, but we could not get past day 3. I don't remember what was in the way, but the stories just kept getting bigger and more expensive and more detailed, and it was fascinating, but it was quite a trip. So we knew that we needed a really good filmmaker, not to just try to get some footage and cobble it together. And so we stopped for a while, and I'll leave it there. And Margot, if you've got something to add to that, we can cycle back around to Deborah. Yeah, go ahead, Margot.
And I think, when I think about it, my desire to make a documentary even started even long before the Dorothy Cotton Institute. When I first met Dorothy and was listening to her stories and was helping her begin to flesh out the outline for her book. And what was clear was there was a piece of, this is a woman who had had an amazing life, and that ought to be honored and preserved and shared. But beyond that, it always was clear that the story here wasn't just about Dorothy. And Dorothy never wanted the story just to be about Dorothy, but it was about an understanding of work for social change and transformation, and the role that transformative education plays in that process. And so part of it was, as we continue to build movements into the future, it's how we're not just trying to preserve the history of the past, we're trying to capture a particular understanding of what the work is, of building powerful movements and of helping people empower themselves and empower each other and come together and move into action. And so I think one of the things that was important, and Deborah, you understood this right from the beginning, is that we weren't trying to just tell a historical story, you know, and I think There's Your Ready Girl captures that sense of the work in the past informing the work in the present, and what's changed, but also what can we learn and bring forward. So I think the only thing I'll add to Laura was, you know, I think we had stopped for a while trying to make the film. And then it's like you approached us, and it was just the right person and the right time. And so it was lovely to come back around to something we had long wanted to do, but hadn't had the capacity to pull off when we first tried it.
Yeah, it was wonderful to make that first connection. And I should say that you know, this was all just by chance, of course, for me. Of course, that's the way things work out. But that when Dorothy and many of you were going on a trip, a listening tour to the West Bank, I was approached to potentially maybe, you know, go along and do some, you know, cover that, which would have been wonderful. So I quickly interviewed Dorothy in 2012 to do a plea for money for that effort. And it was, you know, we went on and on. It was a wonderful interview. And Dorothy shared with me at the time that all her colleagues, maybe not you two, but had told her, oh, don't do an interview. Don't do that. You don't want to do that. Because they weren't sure what it was for or what she might. I was, anyway, it struck me then and again now that she knew her own mind and decided to. And then one thing led to another, and I had this wonderful interview with Dorothy. We didn't get funded to go to the West Bank with you, but it ended up being that this interview is sort of the basis of our getting started on this film together. Yeah. And so that was, and how I got started on this. I see there are a bunch of questions in the chat now.
Deborah, I think you might want to tackle them first. There's a couple of questions about the status of the film and the timeline.
Yes, okay, well,
to start that.
So one thing that's a little confusing sometimes is that There's Your Ready Girl is a standalone 11-minute film that is finished. But it's really just an excerpt of the feature-length documentary we intend to make about Dorothy that expands the scope of that a great deal to include much more. We obviously talked to many of her family members, and there's so much more story to tell about the singing, about the other women in the movement, and about the citizenship education program. So we are fundraising for the feature film, which we are calling Move When the Spirit Says Move, Life and Legacy of Dorothy Foreman Cotton. So that's one of the reasons why the History Center suggested this event, I think, is to sort of spread the word that we're fundraising. We've successfully raised enough money to do a bunch of good videography, I think, which you could see that we already had for the There's Your Ready Girl. So we're hoping that I think that Ella is putting in the chat the donation link on GiveGab, and we've applied to some foundations, and we're very optimistic but you have to be, as a filmmaker, you have to be thinking it's going to work, and it takes time. But we're hoping maybe next year for Clay Carson's Stanford University Film Festival, we could release a finished film, which would be wonderful. So that's where those projects stand. Did anybody want to add anything to that? Nope. Okay.
Well, I could say that one of the things that is thematic in this film concept is the contributions of the unsung sheroes of the movement. Every time Dorothy was asked to do a keynote, do a nice presentation in front of some big crowd, and people were looking at her as an icon, and she was an icon. She was the only woman on Dr. King's executive committee at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was a powerful individual with an incredible personality and great knowledge and skill, but she would always call out the names of other women. She would say, I did not work alone. This movement was powered by so many women who you should know. And I think that really inspired us to go beyond Dorothy's personal story and her personal resume and think about who else could we focus on. And that's going to be a research project, and it's going to take some effort, because a lot of those women have passed. Not all of them have, but because they aren't famous, there isn't necessarily a lot of information in the papers and magazines about them or books written about them. But she would call out Bernice Robinson, Joanne Robinson, Annelle Ponder, Victoria Gray Adams, Annie Bell Devine, Lulabelle Williams, Daisy Gatson Bates. Women some of whom you will know, Ella Baker and Septima Clark, have been written about. Diane Nash is a famous person now compared to some of these other women, but these were the women who drove the movement and who did that work that Andy Young was talking about, knocking on doors and keeping things going and typing the speeches and making sure that people who were coming from out of town to do organizing had a place to sleep and had food. Not just the domestic part of it, but also the empowerment of the community. So that's part of the story we want to tell with this documentary. It's also the focus of the Sisters of Change program that DCI organized in 2020, and we got sort of stopped by the pandemic. We couldn't do some of the programming that we anticipated doing, but the good thing is that our exhibit is now a digital archive, a digital exhibit that the History Center's wonderful curator, Cindy Kielander Cantu, has designed for us. So that will be available to people online. And you'll see some of these women whose names I just called out. And we want to expand on what we can say about them in this documentary alongside Dorothy. These were her colleagues and co-workers.
And the piece I'd like to add to that, Deborah, I think you talked about the timeline for the film and clearly the distribution of it and at film festivals. I think it's important to add the piece that we see this as both as a freestanding film and as a tool for education. And so one of the things we'll be doing at DCI is putting together some, whether it's curricula or questions, materials that people can use to turn this film into an educational program, whether that's an educational program in schools with young people, at universities, with adults. self-study. And so that's an entire another piece that we're planning around the documentary. And so, and Laura was touching on the work of beginning to gather up some of the other stories, but part of the timeline will be preparing educational materials that we can then distribute with the film.
I see a question about a blueprint was mentioned. What was Dorothy's vision for change here in Ithaca for the future here? Dorothy was a news junkie, a talk show host, talk show. What do you call those things when you talk at night? Like you have intellectuals and celebrities on, and not the Tonight Show. But she had a lively mind. And one of the things that was so characteristic of her, as Margot was saying, she didn't want a monument to her past. She wanted to be with it. And what could we do about things right now? She was essentially interested in a call to action. And even though she couldn't march and she couldn't go out to rallies all that much, she was always saying, well, what can we do about that? There's something going on. And she would look at international news and say, what can we do? How can we help? That listening tour that Deborah was mentioning was an example in the Middle East, in the West Bank. How do we listen to the people who are trying, struggling, risking their lives to do nonviolent resistance to the occupation? How are Palestinians and Israelis working together around something that is highly risky? And so one of the things that I think she would really appreciate in terms of that blueprint is, how do we equip people now to speak truth to power, to understand how decisions get made, to have a power analysis, so that then they can figure out where are the decisions being made and who do I contact, who might be an ally, who might be a supporter of some issue that I want to see some action about. How do I influence policy? So a lot of the stuff that Margot was talking about around peer education is driven by the learner. Assuming you're an adult, you have some ideas about the change you want to see, but you're not sure how to go at it and how to be effective. That's something that the Dorothy Cotton Institute is very interested in. What actually produces change? Not just the rhetoric, not just the anger, not just the naming the problem, but what actually gets things to shift. So I think her vision would be of a highly equipped and effective population here taking agency around the change that we want. And we certainly try to do that individually and as an organization. People know what needs to change. They're very smart, but how to get people to pay attention to it so you get resources, you get policies, you get laws that actually make the shift stick, change the system. So that's one thing. And also I see a question from Sarah about the wonderful photos that illustrate the story. Deborah, do you want to say a little bit about how you access some of these incredible images?
Well, a lot of it was actually being in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And they have a great library and a wonderful librarian who helped us a great deal. And they're very proud of Dorothy's legacy there. And they have, the librarian had done some of his own research and so had pictures and was able to point us to exactly where her house had been. But it also touches back to what Laura was saying about the sheroes and the unsung sheroes of the movement, is that, there's no record of a lot of things. It was just no one bothered to take photographs of things and people and to document stuff. But sometimes if you can dig a little deeper, for example, in the library there, they've offered a service where they will take your old home movies and digitize them for you if they get to keep them in their archive as well. And so you never know what's in that kind of stuff. And so that's one of the things we'll be doing a lot more of, is going back to where these things happened and try to find some more stuff. But it's very limiting, which is another reason why it's very rewarding when we find some good material.
There's also a wonderful archive at Stanford at the King Center there. There's a wonderful archive of photographs that were taken during the Civil Rights Movement. And they've been wonderfully generous with us to let us use some of those images, such as Dorothy at the chalkboard, teaching cursive writing. Those came from there, yeah.
You know, while I think of it, we have a couple more questions, but while it's on my mind is that there's some people I wanted to mention that I may have neglected, and that's Rachel Farrow, who's the editor of both of these films and co-director, and you know, obviously wonderfully talented and does a great job. And Norm Scott did the music direction for There's Your Ready Girl with Sing Trace doing that song, which is, This Little Light was one of Dorothy's classics. So that worked out really well. And then all of the Tompkins County Foundation has been hugely important to us and eking us along this far, which is wonderful. And all of the generous donors on GiveGab, including the Stanford Institute, made a donation. So that's wonderful to see. So I don't know, do one of you want to take a few minutes to talk more? Somebody's interested in the West Bank trip.
I can say a couple things. That could be an hour-long program in and of itself. In 2011, the Dorothy Cotton Institute took Dorothy, a number of her elder colleagues from the civil rights movements, a number of younger civil and human rights activists to the West Bank, to Palestine, to meet with leaders in the Palestinian nonviolent, unarmed social change movement and their Israeli allies. And, you know, partly it was an idea I had, and, you know, I think this gives a picture of who Dorothy was. You know, I was learning about this movement for change, and I just thought, you know, I wonder what it would be like to bring elders from this movement here, to meet with activists there, to learn, for us to learn, and for the learning to work both ways. And I remember going to Dorothy and saying, what do you think? And her first response was, let's do it. Can we do that? Right? That sounds fabulous. And so, you know, no small thing it was a 10-day trip. We had, what did you say, Laura, 2 weeks? 2 weeks. You know, we had a number of elders on the trip in their 80s. No small thing for Dorothy's first response to be, absolutely, let's go. You know, and some of the people that folks saw in the film were with us on that trip. Some of the other folks you've interviewed that weren't in the clip here, Vincent Harding, who has since passed, but also came with us on that trip. Do you want to add to that, Laura?
Well, I'm thinking about this quote from Martin Luther King that Dorothy referenced around the nonviolence and the importance of nonviolence, not only as a tactic that is effective in a campaign, but also a way of life. And she looked at it as a way of life, that you really have to live your principles here. And the quote was, the end is pre-existent in the means, and that destructive means cannot bring about constructive ends. I am challenged by that. I'm challenged because I got a temper and I want to fight sometimes. And sometimes I think, you know, enough with the talking and let's get on with it. But she believed very strongly in that. And so the heart and soul of that trip was about finding people who are really willing to take huge risks, you know, to be rejected by their families because they're on the wrong side, and who are willing to go to jail for what they believe, and the refuseniks who didn't want to participate in the military, all kinds of bravery, because they really saw each other as cousins. The Palestinians and Israelis who saw each other as cousins in the heart, very close to one another in ethnicity and in spirit. And so that flavored the itinerary. We definitely spent a long time going from place to place to place, seeing the kinds of NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, service organizations, advocacy organizations that would practice unarmed struggle, but very bravely looking for change and very persistent. Persistence was the theme that we heard over and over again, Sumut, to be persistently leaning in the direction of change and truth.
And I'll add one other short piece that I think ties back, and then Deborah, I know we need to turn it back to you. You know, I had heard for years Dorothy talk about the singing, the value of song in the civil rights movement, right? And whether we were in her living room or somewhere else, she was always trying to get us to sing. But, you know, there's so many things I learned on this trip, and it's a much longer conversation. But what ties back to where you ended the film is I didn't understand until we took this trip with Dorothy and her colleagues, the way song can pick you up and keep you moving forward. So we were listening to very difficult, painful stories. And we were seeing very difficult, painful things. And we would get back on the bus, as Laura said, to go to the next place. And then suddenly Dorothy or Vincent or some of the younger folks they had mentored would just start singing. And there was a way that I understood in a whole new way the place that music had played in keeping people, when the pain gets too much, when the fear is just intense. And so I'll just add, because we have some lovely clips, and I hope they do make it into the final film, of Dorothy, you know, sitting there on a stone patio in the home of one of the activists we visited, just getting everybody in the whole circle singing.
Yes, that we have that clip, and I think it'll be there. So, you know, it's true. I think that this film project, we've touched on a lot of reasons why this is so much more than just Dorothy's life story, and how even more relevant these topics get in our society every day. So we really hope that we can raise the funds to finish this film. We need to travel to Atlanta and to Stanford and maybe DC, you know, and then of course there's lots of local people who have interesting stories to tell, and we have to do the research, and we have to get singing, and so it's a lot to do, but we're really very optimistic, and I hope that I guess I have time to just say that the GiveGab link is in the chat, but it's very easy to find. And we have all of the social media things going, tweeting and Facebooking and a website. So if you enjoyed this, you know, keep in touch. We have a lot of other video assets on the website. And I hope some of you follow up. There have been some interesting tips we're going to follow up on the Q&A. So that's wonderful. And so I think that's it for this evening. We thank you again for coming, and we'll let you know when the premiere is at Cinemapolis.
One more word.
Okay.
2, beloved community. That's Dorothy's vision. That's Dorothy's vision for what this future could be here. And I think we've got a lot of people pulling in that direction, but it ain't easy.
That's right, but we're going to stick with it.
Yes.
It's true. So I guess we're going to save the chat. And thank you so much for coming, everyone. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.